Hi everyone, welcome to the Roundtable conference organized by Nickel and Timed, the official research and public publishing platform for the Center for New Economic Studies. We are the members of the Economics and Finance cluster, and the panelists for today's roundtable include Pratha Khanna, Sukirti Vijayaraghavan, and Jatin Tatia. The roundtable will be moderated by myself, Ojas Sharma. I'll now ask Jatin to give a brief introduction on the topic of discussion.
Hi everyone. My name is Jatin. Today, what we'll be discussing is how the Britain economy is in a very bad situation right now. The central bank described the outlook for Britain's economy as very challenging, and it's seen that the employment would likely to double. Unemployment would be likely doubled. That is to 6.5% during the country's 2-year slump. Britain, the central bank told me that this is the Britain's longest economic crisis, not the deepest though, the longest economic crisis since the records began. And in this scenario, the GDP is projected to decline by around 0.75% over the second half of 2022. And basically, the British economy is in a slump right now. So we'll be discussing basically what caused this Britain crisis, what are the longest implications of it, and what is the government doing, the new government that is elected, that is Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, which is the Prime Minister and the Financial Chancellor, who are looking to improve the situation there.
Great. Now, Sukirti, would you like to pitch in with regards to giving us a background on the crisis and what exactly is going on in a little more detail?
I believe I was to take that over, I think.
I'm sorry already. Yeah, Pratha, go on.
Yes. So, as far as what I've looked up, I think a long time, a while back, I think in around September, a new budget was introduced, a mini budget of sorts, wherein apparently energy rates were on a rise of all time because of COVID and other things, because of which the government sort of decided to cap the energy prices. And along with that, they also cut back a lot of tax rates in order to sort of get more money in the market so that the individuals or the consumers per se would have a little liquidity in hand, because of which now while this happened, I think from my understanding the biggest problem with all of this was that the government wasn't sure how to fund this. Like, now you've already cut back taxes, so of course the government is not getting the money from the taxpayers, so how would you eventually end up funding the economy in that scenario? So I think post that, what happened was that a lot of bonds, I think, were sold, and a lot of that happened because they wanted to get in the money in the economy. And along with that, they ended up taking a lot of borrowings as well, which again sort of so I think there were protests and everything. A lot of people ended up going on the streets saying that they don't trust the government, they don't trust the financial structure and everything, because of which, essentially saying that you've taken a decision, but at the end of the day you don't know how to solve it, and borrowing is not going to solve the problem, because of which I think sterling also fell. And in comparison to US dollar, of course, and like, of course, a lot of people are saying that one of the reasons for that is because the dollar strengthened, and they started like increasing interest rates really quickly. So because of that, there are like two sides to it, where a lot of people are saying that of course it is because of the UK governance, but along with that it is also the fact that dollar strengthened. So I think that is where all of this started from, and that is where the recession per se is coming in.
Right. And I think in addition to that, there are also factors of the Russia-Ukraine war, of course, that drove up the commodity prices, to the ceilings, and the supply chain shocks that we experienced after the pandemic. And the absolute lack of resilience that these supply chains had was sort of like it compounded to the already growing problems of inflation, among other things. And then, of course, we also had huge tons of government debt caused by large bailouts after the coronavirus recession. So that's also these are also perhaps pointers that one could think of. But largely speaking, like in terms of how exactly it is that it got this bad, is really something that one needs to ponder upon, because of course Britain is a country that has experienced basically perpetual crises after crises since the Second World War. There was the loss of Ireland as a territory, followed by the decolonization of all the possessions that they had, which of course then was worsened by uh, things like the 2008 financial crisis that increased wealth inequality, made politically Britain way more fragile, polarized, before more than anything, right, more than ever seen before. So, but apart from all of these, like if one does actually think about how exactly it is that it got this bad, like are there any other factors that we can consider?
I think,
So
okay.
sorry.
Yeah, so Kirti, you can go ahead.
I honestly believe, like looking at the trends, so you had the pandemic, you had the financial crisis. The pandemic has really derailed every single economy globally. And there's always that last straw. And I believe that Truss and I'm not able to recollect his name, but Truss and this other person within the conservative party had suggested the mini budget. And I think that was the last straw that really sparked market volatility, sorry.
Also,
And it caused like a whole downward spiral from there.
Yeah,
I
Pratha,
think
go on.
just before Jatin goes ahead, because he's been trying to say something for really long. So just before that, I think I read up on a lot of articles also mentioning like shadow banking and NBFCs coming into play, which is also a very big reason because the informal sector or the unorganized sector is really like taking lead, not just in Britain actually for that matter, even in India. Like NBFCs as a whole have come up as a huge sector in itself, and they have been challenging the economy in the formalized sector in a very big manner. So yeah, Jatin, over to you.
So I think the person that Sukriti was referring to was the ex-chancellor, that is Kwasi Kwarteng. And basically, yeah, as Sukriti told about how the mini budget was the escalation here, Truss strategy to undertake massive tax cuts in this mini budget was a major problem, because eventually what people observed was that it was, for the benefit of the wealthier in UK. And those massive income tax cuts proved a little too much for the United Kingdom economy, and it escalated the. It was basically a solution to the energy crisis that was the consequence of Russian and Ukrainian crisis, but it eventually led to a deeper economic crisis for the United Kingdom.
Of
I'd
course,
also like to
and
add,
sorry, yeah,
sorry.
go on, Sukhir.
I'd also like to add on to something Jatin mentioned, which was the slashing of taxes. So as it is, like because of the pandemic, there's been an issue with high rise in inflation in the UK. And I think this also decreased the confidence and created anxiety amongst investors, because if you're slashing taxes, it's most likely gonna exacerbate your already rapid rising inflation and destabilize markets all the more. And there's also fear that you're increasing the country's debt by doing so. And well, if you're already on a rapid rise of inflation and now you're going to do something, you're going to implement another policy that is going to create more of an issue later on. It's not an ideal moment for the economy, given its current state. So I think like this was a huge misstep, mainly because they tried to solve one problem without looking at its effects on the other ongoing crises simultaneously.
Of course, and we also must not forget the role that Brexit had to play in all of this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of supply chain problems, then of course Russia, Ukraine, crises, and then so much inflation, everything, and then Brexit, right? And so, from a political lens as well, it is just misstep after misstep, right? Problems after problems, and it's creating a tornado of instability and volatility that, well, it could have been avoided, but um, things are the way they are.
Also,
Yeah, Pratha, go on. Yeah.
just to add in, I think during this budget, like the fact that the budget was brought in is not a problem per se, but the fact that the income tax cut is creating obviously a lot of ruckus. But I think during this, if the government had instead increased taxes or sort of instead sort of looked at how to actually problem or how to actually solve the problem of the energy crisis. Instead, I think it would have saved a lot of ruckus that has and the chaos that has been going on right now. Like, I think if they had reduced the tax rate therein, or instead if they could have tried to sort of understand VAT and GST, the indirect tax regime per se, if they could have targeted that, it would have, I think, solved a lot of problem that's ongoing right now.
Of course, and I mean that's a great segue to try and address the policy changes that have occurred and the effort that the government is putting in to try and solve this problem and the changes of policy that or the reversal in decision making that Rishi Sunak's government made right after Liz Truss left. So, would any of you like to pitch in with regards to what exactly it is that has changed in Downing Street and um, how is it that the public is reacting to it? Are they gladly, pleasantly sort of receiving these changes, or like is there still a lot more that needs to be done that isn't being done? Anyone, guys?
I personally don't have anything to add as of now.
Okay, so well, I mean, the gist is basically that Sunak thrashed the fiscal policy of Truss like fairly well, and then he went on a complete reversal of course and introducing a new set of policies and principles that weren't exactly as much in line with fiscal easing, but rather that focused on trying to reduce interest rates, which has been very attractive towards the middle classes that have that had such great problems with their mortgage prices increasing and skyrocketing after Truss's uh, increase of interest rates, etc. Among other things, but also, I mean, Sunak has entered Downing Street at a time when, I mean, there's been more chaos than any predecessor ever in history, pretty much, because the current situation of the UK is such that the union is almost determined to tear itself apart, right? Not just economically. There's this idea of political economy that is very interesting. That sort of tries to intersect policy and markets fairly well. And then what that suggests is that given the rise in wealth inequality, given the rise in polarization, given Brexit, given uh, all of these things that have happened to the UK so far, there's been speculation that perhaps Scotland will declare independence or that Ireland will become united, right? And this really brings us to the long term prospects or that the UK faces, which is that either, I mean, fiscally speaking, they could either return to the single market of the EU as they were earlier, or perhaps bring a more comprehensive trade partnership in place that would try and ease the problems that they face across the channel. Right. And then, of course, the idea is that the worst case scenario would be that Scotland succeeds following a referendum, which of course would be denied by Downing Street. But if they do so unilaterally, it would lead to them being a part of the EU, followed by, of course, the England and Wales following suit soon, because it wouldn't really make sense for the UK to not be a part of the greatest market in the neighborhood, right? And so that is a really frightening prospect that the UK re-enters the European Union as a crumbled crumbled politically defiant state, right? Is there anything else that you guys would like to add? I mean, we're
Yeah, I
getting into
think
some pretty apocalyptic predictions here.
so. One more thing that I also observed was that when the crisis was really impacting the whole bubble there, one thing that was seen was that Bank of England pledged to buy as much as 65 billion pounds of long-dated conventional government bonds between like September 28 and October 14. And like this was the short-term solution to reestablish the economy there. If this crisis goes on for too long, I don't know what will be the fiscal measures that they can undertake, because buying of bonds also impacts a lot of things such as currency and all that. So that also depends a lot on how Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt goes on this. One more thing that could support their economy right now is raising the capital income taxes, that is the capital gains and inherent tax, rather than cutting public spending or raising income taxes. And these are such macroeconomic policies that they'll have to go for, but just raising interest rates, and they also have to control their inflation. They'll have to control their inflation and raising interest rates, and this is make creating a distrust among investors. So that is one more thing that I would say.
Well, I mean, in terms of raising inheritance tax, we also must understand that the Conservative Party and the voter base that it appeals to is like, it's pretty much the upper middle class, the basically bankers of the city of London and consultants that generally the rich class basically is what pretty much is the voter base of the Conservative Party, and therefore to raise things like inheritance tax or wealth tax would be well met with pretty severe opposition, if anything. Uh, so that's one thing that we can consider. Anything else, guys?
I think also one thing that has sort of increased this entire turbulence is also a very important factor which we've not discussed up until now is the death of Queen Elizabeth, right? Like these policy changes were happening at a very turbulent time in any case, because the royal family in essence, a lot of people, a lot of the voter base, the consumer market is dependent and does look up to the royal family as a whole, right? So passing of such a prominent leader perhaps was very devastating for all of them. And to have these policy changes at that time, then for Rishi Sunak to come in, a lot of people challenging his entire heritage, etc., etc. I think all of this has led up to a lot of turbulence in the market, not just in an economic lens, but also as just a citizen, right? Like, how would you perceive such immense changes one after the other, knowing that there is already a lot that has happened in the past. There is a lot that the economy is already recovering from. The pandemic has obviously taken all of us at a very difficult stance, right? Like every economy is struggling. Not India per se, like of course they're there, but not as much. But of course, all of this has been ongoing for a while now. So for them to re-enter EU, in my opinion, of course, I wouldn't know the exact or drastic changes that it would cause, but I could say that maybe knowing that right now them being separate from the European Union has not really given them much back. So maybe if they do re-enter EU, of course it would be a big setback for Britain as a whole, but it might help them in the future.
Of course, and I think there's a very important point, like with regards to the prospect that the EU, the UK will become a lot more deregulated once they leave the EU, and that all these restrictions on, for instance, banker pay in London that was imposed after the '08 recession would be sort of slashed or cut back, and that the financial markets will enjoy a lot more liberated sort of conditions than they would in the EU or something like that. Would such policies actually make sense? Would they be right in terms of trying to attract more, let's say, in attempts to try and retain their spot as the financial capital of Europe? Would this actually make sense, or would it just is it too little, too late?
In my opinion, I feel like the fact that the fact that Britain would re-enter EU would of course have drastic measures on them as an economy, because even in terms of foreign investment, in terms of employment, in terms of pretty much everything and their global standing as a whole, it would make them sort of a joke, so to say, because like these decisions such as these are of course not taken overnight and they have to be thought through. And the fact that you would go back to like your original position after knowing that you sort of lost journey that you had set out to achieve would obviously not pose well even in the minds of investors, or perhaps anybody. Like even their own citizens would probably not be okay with it and would have a huge bound of like protests, etc.
Of course, but like what I mean is that the idea of having a deregulated UK that is, somehow attracting is offering everything that the EU doesn't. Like, would still that idea make sense at all? Like, would it make sense to have no limits on, for instance, banker pay, as I said, right? I mean, in the '08 recession, just years preceding it, you had analysts that were earning seven figures in bonuses, which was insane, right? And there is a certain appeal to having such a environment once again. But like, would it not cause even more problems, like just as it did in before '08? Are we repeating the same mistakes, or would a deregulated UK still make sense, and are they still on the path of achieving what they set out to be?
I think there are two things that we can look at initially. First is to stabilize the economy as a whole initially, and then take about how long will it take to elevate this economy. So what happens when you talk about a deregulated United Kingdom? It impacts the whole world in a sense when it comes to trade. The United Kingdom is importer and exporter of a lot of materials, and if the United Kingdom's economy can one say deregulate at that point of time, it might lead to like United Kingdom have to do a lot. I mean, you have to consider a lot of solutions, and that's why people want Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt to come up with different types of fiscal and monetary solutions in a macroeconomic level.
Also, I think per se deregulation is not problematic, but achieving the targets that they're trying to set out is what might be problematic. Like knowing, despite the fact that your country has gone in such uh, troubled times, for you to then be a deregulated market and then to achieve that kind of standing and that kind of respect that you had as a global economy, as a global power per se, would be difficult to achieve.
Perfect. Yeah, I think makes a lot of sense. So, Kirti, are there any concluding thoughts you may have?
No, I don't have anything to add.
All right, yeah, I think that's pretty much it then. Thanks a lot for coming, guys. It's been a fascinating discussion. And to the viewers, we hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we did hosting it. And please do make sure to tune in next month for the next roundtable. Thank you so much.